While it is important to look back on past achievements in the past decade, it is equally important to look ahead, and even more importantly, look at present challenges. Our session today aims to look at recent political challenges under the framework of the ASEAN Political Security Community Blueprint and foresee possible challenges and obstacles, namely under the chairmanship of Indonesia in ASEAN in 2023. Now, before we start, I would like to request for a group photo involving the moderator and all the speakers, as well as the Executive Director of the ASEAN IPR. For this purpose, I seek the assistance of my colleagues from the Secretariat. Okay, Excellencies, if I may have you look at the camera and ready your best smile in 1, 2, 3. Once more, please. 1, 2, 3. And one more for luck. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I must ask your indulgence once again as I relay some house rules to ensure everybody's comfort in following the discussion. Today's discussion will be 2.5 hours long. The event is simultaneously live streamed on the ASEAN IPR YouTube channel. Please ensure that you have a steady internet connection and the updated version of the Zoom software. During the presentation from the speakers, attendees in Zoom who wish to pose a question to the speakers may use the Q&A box, while viewers on YouTube can write their question in the live chat box. Please follow the format as explained by the organizer in the chat box. Please refrain from using the chat or message box function on both platforms for personal or extensive discussions. We ask all participants to be polite and considerate in your messages, and thank you for respecting these house rules. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to introduce our moderator for this afternoon, Ms. Yulia Supatmo. Ms. Supatmo has an extensive experience in media and broadcast journalism. Starting as a journalist with Raja Wali Citra Televisi Indonesia in 1996, her career advanced as the managing editor and vice general manager for news and current affairs of Kompas TV Indonesia, then communications consultant for World Bank. Since 2017, she is now the editor-in-chief of Raja Wali Televisi, or RTV. Without further ado, Mbak Yulia, I now hand over the discussion to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kartika, for that warm and gracious introduction. Hello, everyone, wherever you are. I hope everyone is well. Please forgive me. I'm a bit nervous because I'm just recovering from a very bad flu. So if my voice or note or articulation is less than optimal, I apologize beforehand because it's a bit challenging to be able to converse when you have things in your head moving around without your control. Anyway, I am very honored to be able to be the moderator for this dialogue session. And we have 3 very distinguished speakers, which I hope we can tackle the task from ASEAN IPR to address a very challenging and, as Kartika said, ambitious topic of peace in Southeast Asia, in this context, ASEAN. Our first speaker is Her Excellency Ambassador Elizabeth Wen Suseso. She is the Philippines' eminent person to the high-level task force on ASEAN communities post-2025 vision. She has been with the Philippine Foreign Service for over 41 years. Prior to our session today, she joked that she is part of the, what was your term, Ambassador? Senior citizens group, although I'm sure her capabilities are far from that. So welcome, Ambassador. We look forward to hearing your insight. Our second speaker is Mr. Roliansyah Sumirat. Okay, I'm trying to find your, okay. Mr. Sumirat is currently serving as the Director for ASEAN Political Security Cooperation, Director General of ASEAN Cooperation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia. Mr. Roy started his tenure since December 2021. So prior to this position, he served as Director for International Security and Disarmament, the Director General of Multilateral Cooperation. He has served numerous diplomatic assignments, including at the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Indonesia to the United Nations in New York, as well as other positions such as the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Indonesia in the UN, World Trade Organization, and as well as other international organizations in Geneva. And welcome, Mr. Roy. This is our second time meeting. Prior to that, I hope you are well. You've been quite busy since the last time I saw you a few years ago.
Sorry, 4 years actually, but who's counting anyway?
Right. Well, you've been extremely busy and with very important work. Now for our third speaker, we welcome Dr. Tang Siu Moon, who is currently the Director of the Political and Security Directorate at the ASEAN Secretariat. Welcome, Dr. Tang. He was previously head of the ASEAN Studies Center at ICS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore, where he was concurrently Senior Fellow at the Regional Strategic and Political Studies Program. Dr. Tang was also Managing Editor of ASEAN Focus and led the State of Southeast Asia Survey. Welcome, Dr. Tang. I hope you are well.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
You are still too far away, according to Ambassador Bonsu says so.
With a face like me, I think it's good to be far away. You won't like to see what I have on my face. It will turn people away.
Well, we're glad to have you here anyway, whatever size, and we look forward to hearing your insights. So before I hand over the floor to our three distinguished speakers, as an introduction to the theme of our dialogue this afternoon or today, as Kartika mentioned earlier, we are today hopefully going to map out what ASEAN has in store in 2023 and beyond, particularly in the context of how there are new challenges to security and political situation in the region. Of course, these include not only traditional security challenges, but also non-traditional. We now know that there are many new forms of non-traditional security threats, such as cybercrime, terrorism, transnational crimes, as well as illicit drug trafficking. And as we all know, in the past 3 years, we've all grappled with COVID-19, and ASEAN has been at the forefront in trying to cooperate so that we can all survive this pandemic and be better and stronger after this. Now, in terms of the new challenges ahead, we also know that ASEAN has been working very hard to better empower women and youth. We can see this in several initiatives or agendas, such as the ASEAN Regional Plan of Action on Women, Peace and Security, as well as the ASEAN Regional Forum's initiative with youth as a reference point for youth for political and security initiatives in the region. Now, I am definitely not the expert here, so I will soon hand over the first session to Ambassador Buen Suceso to address some of these key points. Ambassador, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Julia, for that kind introduction. First, let me greet my old friend, emphasis on friend, not old, Ambassador Puja. He was a SOM leader when I was ambassador to the ASEAN some years ago. I spent about 6.5 years in Jakarta being the Philippine permanent representative to ASEAN. And ASEAN IPR, at that time we called it IPAR. But you know, when you type IPAR on Google, Auschwitz Institute for Peace and Reconciliation will come out. So we decided to change the name to ASEAN IPR, which is an appropriate name. And I'm happy to see you there at the helm of one of my favorite ASEAN mechanisms, the ASEAN IPR. So congratulations. And the very fact that you are holding this series of discussions is proof that you are taking care of my favorite mechanism, one of my favorite mechanisms very well. So congratulations and thank you for inviting me. Julia mentioned that I've been with the Foreign Service for about 42 years actually, Julia. But you forgot to mention that I was 12 years old when I joined the Philippine Foreign Service. Anyway, And also, thank you to the co-panelists who are also who are very well versed with ASEAN political security community. So I need not worry that I don't remember a lot of things in this pillar because we're supposed to be generalists. But I'll try my best. I think because I am the Philippine eminent person to the high-level task force on the post-2025 ASEAN Community Vision, maybe I should also try to talk about it because this is one of the things that people are watching out for. What will the future ASEAN look like in the next 20 years or so? So let me just say a few words about this first. As you all know, at the 37th ASEAN Summit in November 2020, the ASEAN leaders adopted the Hanoi Declaration on the ASEAN Community's post-2025 vision, which tasked the ASEAN Coordinating Council to oversee the overall process of developing the vision after 2025, because that will be the time that the current community vision will expire or terminate. And its appendant documents, which could include blueprints for future specific areas of focus of the future ASEAN. This became the basis for the establishment of a high-level task force on ASEAN communities post-2025 vision. I'm giving this short introduction because I was informed that we have some students of Asianology, and I want them to be well versed with ASEAN, how we operate, how we plan for our future. In Southeast Asia, people regard with high respect and expectations the role of traditional midwives in delivering infants and even in the rearing of such future members of the community who are in turn anticipated to contribute to the community's development and success. So not just bringing out the child, but also in the growing up, in the rearing of these children. Their role is made even more crucial when the delivery is fraught with unexpected challenges and grim forebodings, such as where we find ourselves today and in the future. The midwife should not only have the necessary skills and wisdom to bring forth the child, but must also be imbued with the passion and the vision to accomplish these tasks. So thus do I regard our task in the high-level task force with so much trembling and trepidation. It is such a delicate task that we have to be very careful in performing our obligations. Among our ranks are two former Secretaries General, Le Luong Min and Ong Keng Yong, and an incumbent or former Vice Minister level officials. We are assisted by high-level representatives. In the Philippines, we have Ambassador Luis Cruz, who was formerly Director General for ASEAN. The gestation of a post-2025 ASEAN will take 3 years, during which the high-level task force will continue to consult stakeholders from the various mechanisms of ASEAN, civil society, and ASEAN's external partners. Malaysia is the permanent chair, but you know, in ASEAN, we are very fond of calling permanent someone who is not really permanent. They will be permanent until 2025 when they will become the chair of ASEAN. And throughout this 3-year period, with the current chair of ASEAN being the co-chair. So next year, we are looking forward to the co-chairmanship of Indonesia, except in 2025 when it is Malaysia's turn to be the ASEAN chair. At this time, any member state can co-chair with Malaysia. It is expected that each year, the high-level task force will submit to the leaders some milestone accomplishments. For example, at the ASEAN Summit in Cambodia this year, last month, the high-level task force has submitted to the leaders the report on strengthening ASEAN's capacity and institutional effectiveness. I'd like to acknowledge the leadership of Indonesia in this very, for me, one of the most important elements, or one of the most important aspects of our work, strengthening ASEAN's capacity and institutional effectiveness, which they adopted, and the progress report on the core elements of the post-2025 vision. I'll speak about them in a little while. The high-level task force has conducted several meetings in Jakarta, in Bangkok, Malaysia this year. We have extensively discussed our rules of procedure and work plan, the core elements to be included in the blueprints, the succeeding blueprints, and the modalities in consulting ASEAN stakeholders, and institutional and administrative reforms which ASEAN needs on its way forward. I've been working with ASEAN for the last 10 years straight. So I have had the privilege to see ASEAN in its strength and in its in areas where it needs some improvement. In the performance of this task, the high-level task force is looking into mega trends and directions, which are likely to extend their impact now and in the future, in the next 20 years or so. And we consider the strengths of the ASEAN Community Vision 2025, particularly studying the mid-year midterm reviews conducted by the three community pillars. As you know, we have the ASEAN Security Political Community Pillar, the ASEAN Economic Community Pillar, the ASEAN Sociocultural Pillar, and all of these have made midterm reviews of how they have been implementing so far the ACV 2025. We look at where we can move on the way forward. But at the same time, we focus on gaps or deficiencies of the present system, particularly on institutional issues. A very delicate topic, but we need to be very honest in our assessment. We have the privilege of, seeing ASEAN in its rawest, in its naked form, and we know its strengths and its weaknesses, where we can contribute to make it a really efficient and effective regional organization that it aspires to be. So cross-pillar and cross-sectoral coordination issues, decision-making, with or without consensus, and others. These are some of the things we are looking into. We, of course, discuss how we can encourage more ownership of ASEAN by its people through stakeholders consultation, including the following. Excuse me. I don't know. Okay. We have we're looking at these things, of course, mega trends and directions. US-China political and economic rivalry, which grows by the day, which becomes complicated by the day. And you see ASEAN there in the middle of this US-China political and economic rivalry. And of course, the Trilateral Security Pact that we are hearing of these days. We're also hearing more and more partners putting up their own Indo-Pacific strategies, and in a way, this is okay. This is good. because people are getting interested in ASEAN. People are looking at ASEAN as an important player in the regional security architecture. We're also looking at the rise of pandemics and other public health emergencies with focus on ASEAN's post-pandemic recovery. You know, as early as 2012, we've been talking about pandemics, but we did not really realize that it was going to hit us that hard. So maybe that's a lesson learned from past. We were prepared, but not that prepared. So this pandemic that we are going through, hopefully we can say that we have gone through next year, but it will have long-lasting effects as we all strive to recover, especially economically, from the effects of the pandemic. We are also looking at increased protectionism and supply chain disruptions. We're looking at the fourth industrial revolution, and artificial intelligence, and of course, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which ASEAN has committed to implement until 2030. And of course, beyond that. We are looking at sub-regional development, such as the Brunei, the BIM-IAGA, as part of the core pillars of ASEAN. And then, of course, we're looking at acceleration of digital technologies and how ASEAN can leverage their benefits and minimize their detrimental effects. There's a grammatical mistake in the bullet because we're talking about technologies. And another issue that we are, taking into consideration when designing the future blueprints of ASEAN would be the need for ASEAN to make a deeper commitment to the climate change agenda and address the issue of resource scarcity. I have strongly advocated, and my colleagues agreed with me, that we need not fix what is not broken. If it ain't broken, don't fix it. And so we believe that the pillared approach to the agenda of ASEAN has been serving us well. But we need to fix what have been identified as gaps or deficiencies in this approach. So what I'm saying is, we retain what is good in the current system, the ACV 2025, but we should add or include what we think are deficiencies in that system. Thus, for the core elements, we recommend the retention of the three pillars, but added two more important columns of ASEAN cooperation. The core elements will be populated by specific action when we write the blueprints for each pillar. For the Philippines, we endeavored successfully to insert in the core elements issues close to our hearts, such as the rule of law, including UNCLOS, human rights, including rights of women and children, migrant workers, and other marginalized groups, climate change, etc. Of course, the other member states also put in what to them is important. This is the beauty of regional multilateralism. The national agenda can be elevated to the regional agenda, and other member states will agree with you that indeed, even if it is a national agenda, it is also a regional agenda. And so that is what we are looking at in ASEAN. For the core elements, we all agreed, as I said, to retain the three pillars. You see them there as 2, 3, and 4. We are adding the first element there as the vision statement, which is a description or a statement of aspiration. What do we want the future ASEAN to look like? So we are putting there a vision statement for all the pillars, what do we want to see in in each of the pillars of ASEAN. And take note that in element number 5, we have elevated connectivity as a major core element. Connectivity is an important pillar of ASEAN. People are want to mouth it as a regular ASEAN slogan. But I'll tell you something. After, I was chair of the Connectivity ASEAN CCC, ASEAN Connectivity Coordinating Committee in 2017. And I said it then, and I'm going to say it now, that it is everybody's baby as well as everybody's orphan. It is a classic example of an ASEAN issue that has cross-pillar ramifications.
Ambassador, apologies, you have 1 minute left.
Well, I want to go to the last, I'll skip my other interventions now and go to this one. What are the security challenges and how ASEAN IPR can help? When states insist that might is right, IPAR can inculcate the culture of peace. You, IPAR, have an important role to play in inculcating all through ASEAN, and even play a major role in the world to instruct or to inculcate the ASEAN principles of the peaceful settlement of disputes that we have been holding on through all these past 55 years. And IPAR can also address the weakest link among its members. And this is the most important message I want to give to IPAR. Please give me 1 minute more, Julia, because the reason why I accepted this challenge is so that I can address the need for ASEAN IPR to operationalize OPAR. If you look at the chairman summary of Cambodia, under the leadership of Cambodia, they instructed us to operationalize the ASEAN Regional Plan of Action and operationalize the ASEAN Women Peace Registry. It has been our dream that ASEAN women be tapped to play an important role in the Women Peace Security Agenda, WPS agenda. And now is a rare opportunity for us, for you ASEAN IPR, to grow this baby. It has been our dream, it has been our ambition, it has been temporarily paralyzed by the pandemic, but the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry should be operationalized. And for starters, I'm going to make a very controversial but very doable example. If some members of the AWOPAR, I call them OSAM OPAR, if they can accompany the special envoy or the ASEAN Secretary General to visit Myanmar and look at the issues there from women's perspective with a gender lens, and then perhaps because women have been known to push for sustainable peace in the region, in a country and in the region, maybe we will see a better future for our region in terms of peace and security. I'd be happy to answer your questions later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Buen Suseso, for that very passionate presentation for us. May I now invite our second speaker, Mr. Roy Sumirat. The time is yours. You have 10 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Ibu Julia. Let me start by thanking ASEAN IPR for inviting me for attending this particular event. Especially, I would like to acknowledge Ambassador Puja. It's an honor to be here with you. And to say that I'm very nervous is understatement, since I have to speak in front of all my gurus And those of you that has already worked in ASEAN for such a long time, even maybe before I joined the foreign ministry. And therefore, I would like to ask your indulgence if there is something that maybe not really correct factually or maybe by concept. Well, please feel free to make adjustment here and there. With regard to the topics that I would like to share with you, dear colleagues, maybe if I may to start by what do you call it, conveying something that is practically very principled. I mean, I have so many questions coming from different or various stakeholders with regard to the issues whether ASEAN is still relevant, still what do you call needed in the current context, especially after the last 55 years of its creations. To answer it easily, I always mention, have we considered what might happen in the past for the last 55 years if there is no ASEAN? I mean, the fact that our region has already practically the beneficiary of relative peace are something that practically I can jump into conclusion it because of the existence of ASEAN. So there should be no other, what do you call it, gray area or further interpretations whether ASEAN remain relevant or not, because it's already there. The fact that we are already entering this particular stage and we can try to even contribute beyond our region is already something that is already becoming our own success story. But of course, the big question is how we are going to maintain this past achievement, if we may say so, and make sure that we remain relevant and valid for the future generations. So if we, let's just say, if we take the current global situations, just take one example, the war in Ukraine. From the perspective of Indonesia, it's only a symptom. It's more, what do you call it, it's a symptom from a more fundamental root cause. When there is a thick trust deficit between countries, international law enforced selectively, unfortunately, and then there is a so-called non-inclusive regional architecture, maybe marginalizing some actors in the region and so on and so on. And of course, the unsuccess story of their part of the world in managing their own rivalries that causing a proxy war. And these are actually lessons learned that should not be followed by us in the region. And the fact that ASEAN has already been established based on those, what do you call it, the principle of non-selectivity, always respecting rule of law, always respecting sovereignty and territorial integrity, not interference. Practically, there is something that is going to be there forever. It's becoming our DNA from the creations of ASEAN itself 55 years ago. So it means this is something that we need to bear in mind every time we are talking about ASEAN. And one important element that also need to be focused, not only in the current stage, but every time, is how the ASEAN should always maintain ASEAN centrality that will enable peaceful and sustainable cooperations, including through interlocking mechanism. And when we are talking about centrality, it should be geographical centrality, institutional centrality, as well as diplomatic centrality. Now, with your permission, I would like to maybe give some kind of small indications about the priorities of Indonesia during our chairmanships next year. But I always mention to colleagues, when talking about priorities of Indonesia during chairmanship, it's just like coming to the cinema. It's just like the banner will be coming soon. So please wait for the big announcement, especially maybe that will be conveyed directly by our president and our foreign ministers. But I can share with you some of the hints that is going to be crafting our what do you call it, activities and priorities. First, we are, again, principle first. We are going to work under the two big framework, which is change and continuity. When we're talking about continuity and change, let's talk about continuity. It means we need to make sure that previous commitment should be continued, should be revitalized, and should be concluded. But at the same time, we are talking about change. Change doesn't have to be necessarily new initiative, but also how ASEAN can make, or at least try to make some kind of adjustment here and there to adapt with current dynamics, because we are not living under the cave, under the stone. So practically we need to adjust, especially as Ambassador Bensuso mentioned earlier, the challenges that we are having now, especially after the pandemic, is something that unprecedented, that need unprecedented efforts from all of us in the region. So I cannot agree with you more, Ambassador, that we need to retain everything that has already been good, and maybe we can add or include some new things that connected to the efficiencies in the system when you are talking earlier about the HLTF processes. So the focus of Indonesia chairmanship is practically reflected also in the theme that we choose, has already been announced by our president last month during the summit in Cambodia, which is ASEAN Matters, epicentrum of growth. ASEAN Matters, clear. It means ASEAN must remain relevant and important. We must be able to face challenges for the next 10, 20 years, even more. We must be very agile, adaptive, competitive. And ASEAN unity must also be strengthened. So it becomes a dignified region and upholds human and democratic values. And also, when we are talking about centrality, other aspect that we need to be remember is we need to strengthen our own centrality so we can become our anchor of stability in the peace in the region, consistent with international law. And this is something that I quote directly from my president's statement last month. We should not be a proxy to any power. And ASEAN should not let current geopolitical dynamics turn into a new Cold War in our region. So that's one pillar. The second pillar, I call it pillar, maybe it's more personal rather than the formal. This so-called pillar, second pillar about the epicentrum of growth. From our way, the way we see it, ASEAN must be a fast-growing, inclusive, and sustainable economic region. And for this, ASEAN must be resilient in facing external shocks. We need to address some of the new challenges like regional health architecture, food security, energy security, financial stability should be in our forefront. And for these two challenges, for these two pillars, we need to make sure that we have adequate institutional capacity. And therefore, Indonesia, through the HLTF processes and now already entering the ASEAN processes, is in the forefront of the efforts in strengthening our institutional capacity, because we need to make sure that ASEAN will be well prepared in addressing new challenges. So I think that's the big theme. But maybe I can also share with you some of the small detail with regard to the specific topics that we would like to bring next year, like maritime cooperations. Again, I will quote from my president's statements that seas should be something that unite us, not divide us. So in these particular issues, maritime cooperations is a must for all of us in the region, and even we can bring our partners from outside the region to make sure that they can contribute positively in this particular maritime cooperations. And then we also would like to put again in the radar the issue of human rights. It's time for us to make sure that the issue of promotion and protections of human rights can be put equally, because so far there is some kind of maybe judgment from external factor that maybe ASEAN member states only put more attention to the issue of promotions. So it's time maybe to make sure that the balance is created between promoting and protecting of human rights. And then the other issue like South China Sea, we would like to continue the process of the negotiations for the code of conduct on the South China Sea, together with other ASEAN colleague, with our colleague from the People's Republic of China. Other issue of connected also maybe with regard to the transnational organized crime, including but not limited to the issue of trafficking in persons. Lately, we have already witnessed so many cases connected to the issue of trafficking in persons in the region that need our special attentions. And last but not least, the issue of Myanmar. I mean, we have no hidden agenda in whatsoever. We just want to make sure that we collectively as ASEAN is going to be always there, helping and assisting our brother and sister from Myanmar to come back to normalcy. So therefore, we are going to spend time and resources, educate proper attention also in materialize this particular what we call intentions from all of us to assist our Myanmar colleague. So last to conclude, dear colleagues, there will be around 700 ASEAN meetings more next year, and around 300 meetings will be conducted in Indonesia. So at least, Ambassador Bensuso, I can assure you that you are going to be becoming a regular visitor next year in Jakarta for so many meetings that we need you to be here. I will conclude my remarks there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Roy. You have a deficiency in time. You sure you want to stop here?
I will what do you call it, give the rest of the time to Mr. Tang, and I will take it again later on during question and answer.
Okay, great. Thank you, Pak Roy Sumirat, for your insight and sharing with us. Our next speaker, our third speaker, is Dr. Tang Siew Moon. I invite you now to the floor. You have also 10 minutes for your presentation. And just before Dr. Tang starts speaking, I think there was a question from the audience. I believe not all speakers have prepared slides or presentations. So I think this will be a good time for us to exercise really listening and focusing on what the speakers are saying instead of just looking at the screen. Okay, Dr. Tang, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Ibu Yulia, and good afternoon, Excellencies, friends and colleagues, and especially warm regards to Excellency Ambassador Elizabeth Wun So Seso and His Excellency Bapak Roy. Allow me to thank the ASEAN Institute of Peace and Reconciliation and His Excellency Ambassador Puja for inviting me to join the distinguished panel to share some of my personal thoughts and reflections on regional peace and security. Notwithstanding the big emblem that you see beside me and then the flag on the table, please allow me to speak in my personal capacity so that I can do so freer and to share with you my personal views. Also, please indulge me in congratulating Ambassador Puja, his team, and extended ASEAN IPR family on the occasion of the Institute's 10th anniversary, as well as the successful commemorative exhibition at the sidelines of the 40th and 41st ASEAN Summit in Phnom Penh in November. Madam Moderator, allow me to divide my comments into 3 clusters of questions or issues, namely how to strengthen political security cooperation and the challenges that lie ahead for ASEAN. Second, the role of the ASEAN Secretary in the wake of recent political developments. And third, the role and contribution of Track 1.5 to regional peace and security. Excellencies, the very question on strengthening political security cooperation itself deserves closer scrutiny. We should ask ourselves, what is the end game? Compared to the ASEAN Economic Community, which aims to create an economically integrated region or community, the end game for the ASEAN Political Security Community, to me at least, is less clear. The APSC does not aspire to forge a common foreign policy or common security policy, nor a military alliance. Even the high stakes involved in the political security realm, political cooperation is manifested in confidence-building measures, and functional cooperation and its deliverables are always going to be less ambitious. Thus, we need to temper our expectations, especially when the record of the APSC is compared to those of the AEC and AACC. Please do not misunderstand my statement. I'm not saying the APSC is doing less work. It is just that a lot of the work the APSC in the political security pillar does in strengthening peace and security is like a duck swimming in water. The duck on surface looks calm, but a lot of the action takes place below the water. So a lot of the good work that Pak Roy, Ambassador Elizabeth has been doing and continues to do will not be seen, but their fruits of the labor continues to be enjoyed by all. Security is a foundation for economic prosperity, economic growth, and also for our social cultural development as well. Ladies and gentlemen, the basis for strengthening cooperation is, of course, trust and a unity of purpose, without which cooperation is all but impossible. It must also be remembered that political security cooperation will always be a balancing act between national and regional interests. A strong dose of national interest will stop ASEAN in its tracks. On the other hand, strong regional sentiments may also erode national positions and might push back for member states. Thus, ASEAN needs to walk a fine line between contending national and regional interests. Let me move on to the next subject on challenges faced by ASEAN, of which I would further divide into internal and external dimensions. On the internal dimension, the fundamental challenge to me is for ASEAN to evaluate if the original compact made by the 5 founding members in the form of the Treaty of Bangkok in 1967 is still relevant for the increasingly complex, dynamic, and changing geopolitical, strategic, economic, and social cultural landscapes. It's a modality for regional cooperation set 55 years ago, still fit for purpose in 2023 and beyond. As the membership for ASEAN grew from 5 in 1967 to 10 in 1999 and would soon expand to 11 with the accession of Timor-Leste in due course, ASEAN could not take its unity and centrality for granted. How would ASEAN preserve its unity while maintaining its and remaining an agile and responsible regional organization that is capable to react and overcome present and future challenges, as well as harnessing external opportunities? In other words, I echo my previous distinguished speakers that do not fix what is not broken, and we have a strong track record to build on. But at the same time, we should not rest on our laurels. We should always move with the times and keep looking back in order to move forward in that sense. On the external front, ASEAN's core principles of openness and inclusiveness is constantly being tested by major power rivalries, and in recent times by the Ukraine crisis, as well as the turbulence in the Taiwan Straits. The policy of not choosing sides had allowed ASEAN to stay above the fray of competing major power interests. In this regard, we have to ask ourselves if this policy remains to serve us well. How can ASEAN square the circle between not choosing sides and having a strong and vocal voice in the international system? There is a perception that not choosing sides means not choosing or having any positions. That, to me, perhaps is untenable. Not having a position means losing our voice internationally and also regionally. If ASEAN aspires to be a player in the global arena, can it do so by not taking positions out of abundance of caution that such actions might be interpreted by some parties as choosing sides? Also, on the external front, the idea of centrality is not just a philosophical construct, but it's a matter of the survivability and also the relevance of ASEAN. Related to that is, how can we further strengthen the relevance and the role that regional security architecture plays? The proliferation of minilateralisms in the past years, AUKUS, the strengthening of Quad, are wake-up calls to ASEAN that if you do not move to strengthen the ASEAN-led regional security architecture, we may be bypassed, or there may be other contending structures that would compete for the interests of our external partners and indeed some of the ASEAN member states itself. Excellencies and friends, since its establishment in 1976, the ASEAN Secretariat takes pride in its work to support ASEAN member states in fostering regional cooperation and community building. It has also grown, as some had colorfully suggested, to be the eyes and ears of ASEAN, while maintaining its objectivity and neutrality. However, in light of recent political developments in one ASEAN member state, ASEAN Secretariat has been criticized as irrelevant, ineffective, and many other choice words that shall not be said in public in polite company such as this. It is thus useful for us to understand that the ASEAN Secretariat, as the name implies, is the administrative support arm of ASEAN, and it does not perform any policy-making functions for the regional organization. In order for the ASEAN Secretariat to perform its duties and serve ASEAN and its 665 million people, it needs to remain a professional and apolitical entity. It bears reminding again that ASEAN Secretariat does not make policies. That responsibility falls on ASEAN, which is made out of 10 member states, each with its own national interests and consideration. Ladies and gentlemen, last but not least, allow me to speak briefly on the role of Track 1.5. Obviously, given my past familiarity with this process, I'm a strong advocate for stronger and more dynamic Track 1.5 and Track 2 engagement in the larger ASEAN communicating process. Track 1.5 and Track 2 specifically allow for freer conversations and exchange of views, as well as serving as platforms to incubate and test new policy ideas. Institutions such as ASEAN IPR has gone a step further in not just talking about peace and reconciliation, but has successfully ventured into the practice of mediation and building networks of peace builders and advocates, such as the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry. ASEAN IPR is proof that given the political support and financial support, Track 1.5 and Track 2 can supplement and contribute positively to ASEAN community building and regional peace and security. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to end my brief comments by wishing Your Excellencies, as well as all our friends in ASEAN and beyond, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you one and all for taking the time from your busy schedule and your vacation time to exchange views with us on the future of ASEAN. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Tang, for that very concise but insightful presentation. Now, I was told that I needed to summarize the statements of the three speakers, which is very unnerving. But let me just touch on a few points that were raised by our three speakers. Madam Ambassador Buen Suceso basically outlined her job in the high-level task force. One of the key things that I picked up, and I apologize if I'm not altogether as sharp as everyone else that might be following this discussion, but basically, don't fix what isn't broken. Yes, keep the elements that's already working, but also address some of the bigger challenges that will be faced by ASEAN post 2025. Before I forget my train of thought, perhaps I could just start raising questions to the speakers, and then we can pick up from there. And then I promise we will get to the questions raised by our audience very soon. But first of all, perhaps to Ambassador Buen Suceso, so my question is this. What have you identified as the biggest challenge in terms of keeping ASEAN's unity post 2025 when we talk about all these new threats to peace, particularly the non-traditional ones, where we know that every ASEAN member states has different priorities. Its society has different needs, different levels of growth and so forth. So how do you keep that unity and keep this as something that works? Perhaps we can start from there.
Thank you very much. You are giving me an opening to promote my book. Because this is basically, may I just flash my my book on ASEAN centrality. That's it. You can compare how I looked like 5 years ago and how I look now. There I am.
Still the same. Still the same. Just a lot more hairspray.
This QR code will tell you where to buy this book, and I'd like to credit Dr. Tang for helping me, approach ISEAS to publish this book, which they readily agreed. In this book, I show vignettes of how consensus, of how ASEAN arrived at very difficult solutions to the challenges that face it among ourselves, with or without consensus, and vis-a-vis external partners, especially in the last few chapters of this book. I recount how ASEAN multilateralism is effective in addressing very, very difficult, contentious issues. As you know, ASEAN is made up of 10 very, very different countries who are near each other and yet so different in even in forms of government, in the level of economic development, even in our political, in our cultural upbringing, in our colonial past, etc. I have never seen a more diverse group of countries. And so therefore, you expect that each 10 member states will bring to the table different perspectives, different national agendas, different perspectives. And yet, as I was hinting at just now, we are able to arrive at a common solution to the problems and the challenges that confront us. Take, for example, the South China Sea issue, which is, I think, burning in the minds of your audience right now, and even among the critics and the academics and think tanks of ASEAN, of ASEANology. People say ASEAN does not have a common position on the South China Sea issue. I beg to disagree. In this book, I trace where the ASEAN common position is as far as the South China Sea issue is concerned. Where is the common position? The common position is that the rule of law, that right is might and not might is right. The rule of law, including international law, particularly UNCLOS. Everybody in ASEAN agrees that this is how we should approach this problem. Also, the peaceful settlement of disputes, the so-called ASEAN way, people and the issue and the principle of consensus. Consensus is a much maligned principle. People attack it, criticize it, saying ASEAN is too slow because of consensus. I say that it is consensus that enabled ASEAN to reach where it is now. Because when there is consensus, there is buy-in, there is ownership of the projects of ASEAN. And even when there is no consensus, ASEAN manages to arrive at a solution that will keep the peace and stability in the region. So please, if you have time, read this book so that we can, you will see how in many, many instances in the vignettes that I recount in this book, of course, I cannot be mentioning names. It's beyond the ethics of autoethnography. But this book will tell you how ASEAN has been able to address even the most contentious, the most difficult challenges that have faced it. Thank you.
So, continuing on that train of thought, may I now go to Pak Roy Sumirat? Ambassador Buen Suceso mentioned that the common position, at least in the case of the South China Sea, is the rule of law. And this is basically how ASEAN functions for maybe students, or maybe observers, or maybe external parties looking into ASEAN. They're always saying, well, how do they get anything done when everything is based on consensus? There isn't anything really strong in terms of their positioning in world affairs. So if we were to apply the rule of law position of ASEAN into the Ukraine and Russia war, how would ASEAN respond to external questions that say, well, if you say that your position is the rule of law, then shouldn't you issue, or shouldn't ASEAN issue a stronger position about the Ukraine and Russia war? Pak Roy? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but since
This
Indonesia
million
will
dollar
be
questions
chairperson.
that I need to reflect a little bit longer. But thank you very much for posing a question. It's very, very what do you call it, important questions that might have connections with so many aspects when we are talking about current condition internally in ASEAN, or even ASEAN vis-a-vis the external community. But I will try to segment it into several parts. With regard to South China Sea dynamics, again, I will echo Ambassador Abuensu's earlier statements that practically we have our own common visions, especially when we are putting UN Conventions of Law of the Sea, UNCLOS 1982, as the primary norms that should always be applied when we are talking about anything connected to the managing situation in the sea. Even this morning, there was a big event convened by our chair, by our Cambodian colleague, connected to the issue of South China Sea, in particular with regard to the anniversary of declarations of conduct, the DOC from 20 years ago, because this year actually is quite a special year for us, because we have the so-called 20 years anniversary of declarations of conduct of the South China Sea, but also at the same time the 40 years anniversary of the UN Conventions of the Law of the Sea. So practically it's clear that we would like to maintain the situation, the stability, the peaceful environment that we had currently in South China Sea, just like this. So that, of course, we need to make sure that our external partners also share similar sentiment in order to to maintain the current situation. And actually, it's not that problematic if our external partners also can adhere to their own pledging and promises. Don't forget that our external partners are already signed the Treaty of Amity on Corporations. Currently, we have, Patang, correct me if I'm wrong, we have 49 countries adhere to the 51 50 with Ukraine, the last one, right? When we last month we had the Ukraine and signing the TAC. So we have 50 countries adhere to the TAC, and practically even when it comes to the big powers, big partners, the member of the East Asia Summit, they also bound by the so-called maybe other norms from the region, including the Bali Declarations of 2011 with regard to the principle of mutual friendly relations. So the social contract is already there. Need to respect sovereignty and territorial integrity. Always want to solve dispute through peaceful manner. So many elements that is already been practically binding to everybody, for us internally and also for external partners that has already signed their pledging to us. So it means now comes the issue of implementations or the political will, whether they want to really show their intention to implement their faith, their pledging in the right manner or not. In short, maybe I put it in the too simplistic way. I mean, we can practically still understand if there is some kind of dynamic, rivalries, even conflict between big powers outside the region. But please, when we are talking about dynamic in the region, in our region, they need to follow a set of rules, set of norms, set of standards that we already created in the region. So that's why for us, ASEAN centrality is something that we always need to put as a principle in order not to be dictated by other external partners that, of course, they have their own agenda or priorities with regard to the situation in the region. But for sure, we, countries in the region, we are going to be there forever. We are not going to, let's say, wake up tomorrow morning and already move to some other region in the world. We are going to be always there. We need to make sure that we maintain good relationship, maintain our situation, and our external partners also should at least respect our collective achievement in maintaining peace and security up to now.
Okay, thank you, Pak Roy. Before going back to Ambassador Gwen Suseso, Dr. Tang, we're still speaking in the same general theme here, but you mentioned in your talk earlier about how the world is obviously different from 1967. Is the pact still relevant today? Perhaps some people or some parties are questioning that, but I would like to ask your view or perspective. Is there anything that could possibly make the 1967 pact irrelevant for today and the future for ASEAN? And if there are those elements, would you be able to identify them for us?
Thank you very much, Ibu. The unique thing about the Treaty of Bangkok is that it's a relatively short document, very brief, very foundational. So there's not much things that we can pick on in that sense, nor do we want to. It is sort of like our founding document in that sense. Maybe what I was trying to allude to is perhaps on I think here we need to pay homage to the good work that Ambassador Elizabeth and her colleagues at the HLTF has done, and also Ambassador Elizabeth has also credited Indonesia for the initial proposal of the strengthening paper. It is now not a paper. It is a recommendations that have been adopted by the leaders. So to paraphrase Pak Roy, wait for the area coming soon. There will be, I think, some major changes that is afloat, because the ASEAN Coordinating Council has been tasked by the ASEAN leaders to follow up on the recommendations that was adopted on how to strengthen ASEAN and to make it a more effective institution. I think one of the areas that the ACC is tasked to look into is on decision making. And that, I think, if I may, Ambassador Elizabeth, just to let the cat out of the bag a little bit, it is to perhaps look into situations where ASEAN member states cannot make a decision based on consensus, but it's a core issue that needs a decision. You're not talking about daily life or work, everything, but something that is very, very essential, that strikes at the heart of what ASEAN is, where the core very issue, but the decision needs to be made, but due to the lack of consensus, no decision could be made. So what do we do in those circumstances? So the ACC is tasked to provide more concrete recommendations to the leaders for it to be implemented. The other element is, of course, is in 1967, to be frank and pardon me, that I do not mean any disrespect to our 5 founding fathers of ASEAN, but I think in 1967, 5 of them would not recognize ASEAN today. If they come over to ASEAN Secretariat and say, what is this? It's only 1976 ASEAN Secretariat was established. It wasn't started in 1967, and it's not started in 1968. So in 1967, nobody had any idea that ASEAN will evolve into what we are now. Yeah, for sure, terms like regional integration will be very alien to our 5 founding fathers. Now, these are the terms that we take for granted, that it is part of what ASEAN is in that sense. So it's very different ASEAN. So perhaps what I'm trying to hint is that the high-level task force and the post-2025 vision is supposed to think through how to future-proof ASEAN for the next 10, 20 years in that sense. So maybe we may not need to reinvent the whole wheel in that sense, but certainly what are the ingredients that makes into making a better, stronger, more resilient and more vibrant view? That is something that we can definitely look at. So I think the ball is literally in Pak Roy's court in that sense. As a incoming chair, Indonesia has the task of leading the ACC. And from that, the discussion of the ACC will be important to lead us forward on how to rethink in terms of decision making and also of funding ASEAN. Thank you, Ibu.
Thank you, Dr. Tang. We already have a lot of questions in the Q&A box, but before we go there, because we still have time, could I ask Ambassador Buan Suseso? I know it's still a work in progress, but just coming off from what Dr. Tang said, what recommendations, if you can share, will be part of that? Don't give away the whole thing, but you know, if you best you can hint or perhaps give an overview.
Thank you. I think that you are reading my mind, Julia. You are very good at asking the very questions that want to jump out of my mind. Yes. Director Roy and Director Tang know that I am one of the most vocal persons in the eminent persons group in the high-level task force. And I have always been very vocal about the need to correct institutional gaps. And one of the institutional gaps is charter change. In the Philippines, we call it cha-cha, charter change. And in the Philippines, as well as in ASEAN, people seem to be allergic to the term cha-cha, charter change, because it might entail, major changes where ASEAN needs to tread more slowly. But for me, I'm very strongly in favor of addressing the gaps in the charter that are not, accurate anymore today. For example, Article 14 of the ASEAN Charter does not name any human rights body. It's about time, because the ICHR was created 2009, 2007 was the issuance of the charter, ASEAN Charter. So we need to correct that. Or if we're not happy with ICHR, put something else there, but we need to mention the ICHR or another name that ASEAN might choose. So factual and updated information for the ASEAN Charter. The next thing that I'd like to also address in the Charter is the fact that, I have always been very vocal about cross-pillar and cross-sectoral coordination. The pillared approach is very good, because the three community pillars are able to closely implement what they have in the blueprints. So there is focused implementation of the action plans. This focus is such that they tend to grow in silos. They don't look at one another. So there is a very big gap in cross-pillar coordination. One good example is women or gender mainstreaming. The issue of women, you have women peace security in the APSC pillar. We have women economic empowerment in the AWEN, or the economic network of women. And of course, there's the sociocultural aspect, the promotion and protection of the rights of women. These are cross-pillar, cross-sectoral issues that are not addressed properly because there is lack of coordination in the current system. We have to institute changes in the charter so that we can have an effective cross-pillar and cross-sectoral coordination. While I have the floor, Julia, please allow me 1 minute because I told you about my book on ASEAN centrality, but I did not tell you what ASEAN centrality is according to that book. My co-panelists have referred to ASEAN centrality in a very important way, and I completely agree with them. And because the theme of this forum is peace. How do you sustain peace? What are you were asking me, what do you do in the face of security threats in the region? Still, the two most important flashpoints, the Korean Peninsula issue, and the South China Sea issue, plus now there is the Taiwan element, and many other global conflicts that are affecting ASEAN. What is the antidote? The antidote, we cannot prevent people from, creating conflicts or avoiding conflicts. They will come to our region. What is the antidote? ASEAN centrality. And according to my book, ASEAN centrality means that the agenda of the region should be the ASEAN agenda. We must not let others dictate their agenda on us. ASEAN centrality means ASEAN format, ASEAN language, ASEAN setting. What does it mean? We should follow the ASEAN norms of doing things. We do not confront issues in a manner that is not ASEAN. The ASEAN way is polite, but honest, non-confrontational, polite, and seeking for solutions. So ASEAN must dictate the format, the tone, the language of how we confront the challenges that face us. Challenges will always come. You already mentioned several of these challenges. And the most effective antidote is ASEAN centrality. Thank you very much.
Audience, few more minutes before we get to your Q&A. Mr. Roy, Dr. Tang, would you like to add or dispute what Ambassador Buan Suceso said?
With your permission, Ibu Julia, it will be a sin for me not to show my support to statement from Ambassador Buan Suceso. Maybe some additional point from me. It is going to be very important that ASEAN member state always knows what we want and what we need. Sometimes we know what we don't want, what we don't need, and then when we are going to be asked what really our need and what really our want, we don't know yet. So there's something that we need to fix in order to make sure that the external partner will always be in a position to squeeze themselves properly to our needs, and they are the one who need to adjust with regard to our condition. If they want to contribute to our situation in the region, of course we are going to be always be open, but not at the expense of ASEAN centrality. So that's why we always need to make sure we know what we want and what we need. And also maybe with regard to current dynamics in the region or outside the region, Ambassador Buan Suceso mentioned earlier about situation in Strait, in Korean Peninsula. Again, that is something that inevitable, and we need to react properly. And at least for this particular year only, ASEAN foreign minister managed to have several separate joint statement on the situation in Korean Peninsula, and then common statement on the situation in Ukraine, couple of times, joint statement. Not to mention also one particular joint statement with regard to the cross-strait situations, issued during the meeting last August. So at least we managed to come into the least common denominator among us when we are reacting to the dynamics inside the region and outside the region. And maybe we cannot be always very ambitious with regard to the substance, but the fact that we managed to come up with common statement is already achievement by itself. But of course, it's not something casted on the stone, and we need to improve from time to time with regard to the substantial content itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Dr. Tang, you'd like to add something?
Thank you very much, Ibu. I wholeheartedly concur and support the perspective shared by my more learned and distinguished panelists. Just to add to Pak Roy's point, that Pak Roy earlier shared that there are now 50 members, 50 high contracting parties to the Treaty Amity Corporation. And it's also very instructive and very interesting to note that the 50th member is Ukraine. How do you read Ukraine, which is very far away, being a member of the Treaty Amity Corporation? So maybe perhaps what I'm hinting is that to understand ASEAN, sometimes do not read what is stated clearly, because as Pak Roy mentioned, the lowest common denominator means that a lot of the things that we want to say Our true feelings, our true opinion cannot be said because due to consensus, we have to come up with language that is amenable to all in that sense. But nevertheless, sometimes do not read only the glass half empty, but read about the glass half full. So there are some circumstances ASEAN tries to take positions and also make its position known through an indirect way, but this does not mean that ASEAN has been silent. On that note, I also think that ASEAN analysts, ASEAN scholars, ASEAN media, we in ASEAN do not give ourselves enough credit. We ourselves deride and also make fun of ASEAN mechanism as talk shops. Yeah, a power of convenience means that we are just hosting meetings. We in the driver's seat, that means we are driving somebody else. Yeah, we are essentially taking instructions from others. I think all these are misrepresentations of what ASEAN has been doing, and the role that we have been playing in leading these ASEAN-led mechanisms is very important and central to the notion of ASEAN centrality. Imagine ASEAN is collectively, maybe with all the respect to Indonesia and Vietnam and Philippines and other medium-sized countries, very relatively compared to other big countries in the world, a collection of 10 small countries. But yet, we are the only regional organization that can bring all 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council in a meeting on a yearly basis. No other organizations have that ability to convene such high-level meetings at the summit level. Yeah, and this is credit to all the good work that that all our ASEAN leaders, foreign ministers have been doing through the past decades in asserting our centrality, putting a platform where everybody comes to share our views, yeah, and also for them to hear our views and for them to talk among themselves as well. A lot of bilateral meetings happen among our visitors at the sidelines of the ASEAN meetings. And this is a very important diplomatic tool that cannot be undermined. And that is our contribution to peace and security in the region. Thank you, Ibu.
Thank you, Dr. Tang. We now go to our Q&A session. There have been a number of questions from the audience, some directed directly to one of the speakers, but others in more general terms. The first question is from Mr. Tan Tun. So this query is related to the future of possibly implementing the ASEAN Vision 2025 within ASEAN centrality and Goal 16 of the UN SDG 2030, which calls for the promotion of just, peaceful, and inclusive societies in building sustainable development communities in our planet, including the ASEAN region. The question is, he is wondering, will all these ASEAN IPR's efforts related to Vision 2025 of ASEAN and the UN goals for peace and stability be implemented in reality sooner or later, at least in our region? Okay, who wants to tackle that question? Yes, Ambassador Princesa.
Thank you. It's a bit difficult to fathom the meaning of the question, but it appears to me that our respected member of the audience is asking, how will you implement your vision of what the ASEAN of the future will look like? So our answer to that is, we are not creating blueprints out of nowhere. We are not relying on our own vision of the future. We are conducting consultations with all the stakeholders from, you can imagine, as I was saying earlier, you have thousands and thousands of stakeholders, the people of ASEAN. So in fact, we have had long discussions in the HLTF of who to consult because we cannot possibly be talking to millions of stakeholders. So we have classified the number or the kind of stakeholders that we will be consulting to find out what their aspiration for ASEAN is. And in connection with that, one of the most relevant questions to us in connection with that is ASEAN identity or ASEAN awareness. What to me is ASEAN identity is the ability of the people of ASEAN to identify with the aspiration of ASEAN. It doesn't mean we're all the same. We all look the same. We all eat the same thing. We all, think the same way. That is not the right frame of looking at ASEAN identity. For me, ASEAN identity means to identify with ASEAN as a citizen of ASEAN. And how do you form this collective aspiration of ASEAN? And so we will be conducting consultation with groups like women, the youth, entrepreneurs, small, medium enterprises, etc. We will be talking to government as well as to civil society stakeholders to know what is in their hearts and in their minds and in their view of the future. We may not be able to talk to all of them, but what will be crystallized is a collective ideal, a collective aspiration. And this will be what the future of ASEAN will look like. In terms of practical implementation of this vision, we will be writing blueprints that will have specific action lines. How do you achieve your vision of the ASEAN of the future? So you have specific action lines which will be implemented by the respective ASEAN mechanism, whether it is the ASEAN group on the environment, the ASEAN working group on human rights, etc. So it is not a vision that is created out of our own imagination. No. It is just the fact that we have been chosen to interpret the vision of ASEAN by crafting these blueprints and by inserting there how to achieve these aspirations for the future.
Thank you, Ambassador Buan Suseso. The next question is for Pak Roy. Earlier, you outlined what will be the focus area for next year ASEAN's chairmanship. Could you share with us how the next year of chairmanship will advance women and youth peace security agenda?
Okay, thank you very much, Ibu Yulia. It's going to be always interesting on how we are going to deal with some new, let's say, non-traditional issues, especially connected to security, like women, peace and security, youth peace and security. And again, for us, this is also something that is going to be very dear and near to our heart. But of course, we also need a collective guidance from other ASEAN member states in how robust we are going to put all those new non-traditional issues in the radar of our collective activities. And also we need to make sure that we are always going to be in line with our collective efforts in other forums, especially in multilateral forum, when we are talking about United Nations framework, for example, connected to those new challenges, security challenges. For example, I mean, women, peace and security issues in the UN is already there from the year 2000, when it is when the Security Council of UN adopted Resolution 1325. But the youth, peace and security come only to the equations of the United Nations only maybe recently, when I think Security Council Resolution 2250, I think, on the year 2015. So there is some kind of gap between the issue of women and youth and peace security. But at least we in the region is not living in a vacuum. We always try to mirror something that has already been decided or occur in the global world, in the multilateral forum. And then we try to make sure that we also properly reciprocate the activities, the discourse in the global audience in the in our region. And in this regard, with regard to the youth, peace, and security, we are practically also always going to be in the forefront together with other ASEAN member states colleague. For example, we practically part of the drafters of the ASEAN Youth Development Index that was first launched in 2017. And we always encourage youth, future leaders as the agent of peace to always nurture and spread the values of moderation and tolerance, among others, especially since one of the challenges that we are facing now is the issue of intolerance and radicalism. So in this regard, we also initiated ASEAN Youth Interfaith Camp, also in 2017, the kick-off event on the ASEAN Declarations of, I think, culture of prevention for the peaceful something, I forgot the long name, connected to the harmonious society, that now becoming the annual event of ASEAN Work Plan of Youth. So I think we would like to work together more with our ASEAN member state, also with other partners from outside the region in advancing the issue of youth, peace, and security. And we need to make sure that it's going to be in line with our collective and previous work in other areas. It means the so-called new emerging traditional, the non-traditional security issue should be always put on par with the traditional security issues itself, because the challenges is always there when we are talking about counterterrorism, the trafficking, the transnational organized crime with all those derivations, including people smuggling, trafficking in persons, drugs trafficking. So the challenges will always be there. So we need to make sure that we put proper attention to each and every segment of the challenges.
Okay, thank you, Pak Roy. The next question, it's not designated to a particular speaker. So speaking about the streamlining processes and continuity, under the 55 years of ASEAN existence, there has only been 2 conventions created particularly against terrorism and human trafficking. In this regard, would an institutionalization of a particular framework, example, a convention on the development process framework, to be of any value to facilitate the remaining priority areas such as people smuggling? Would any of you like to speak on that aspect or this question? This has something to do with, I think, Ambassador Buan Suseso and Pak Roy, I think, for your Indonesia's chairmanship next year.
I think the one of our members of the audience would like to find out if there is a particular template or guideline in the making of a convention or a treaty or an agreement. There is no such template, but the practitioners of ASEAN follow an unwritten procedure or process by which they arrive at a decision like that, such as the Convention on the Prevention of Trafficking, especially of women and children. I'm very personally attached to that convention because under ASEAN procedures, there should be at least 6 countries to ratify, to deposit their instrument of ratification so that it will become enforceable. It will enter into force. By the way, again, another insight into how differently ASEAN processes, how you should consider how different ASEAN member states process their ratification procedures. In the Philippines, we have to go to our Senate, to our parliament, and you know how difficult it is to get a ratification from the Senate. Other member states, it's an executive decision. The Prime Minister says so, then it goes. In other member states, so different procedures. That is why these unwritten procedures take into consideration the different setups in each member state. There are certain guidelines, such as what I said, is you use ASEAN language. You use ASEAN principles of non-interference and peaceful settlement of disputes, etc. So these are the guiding principles, but you cannot, I think, prescribe a certain procedure because of the differences among the political processes of member states. It would be good if somebody wrote some guidelines, some general guidelines, but I will not prescribe a manual, for example, for people to follow, because in my experience, when I was chairing ASEAN, I had to take into consideration very, very specific setups in each member state.
Would you agree, Pak Roy, Dr. Tang?
Maybe Patang first, maybe I can add later.
Dr. Tang, would you agree with the ambassador's assessment?
Yes, I would always agree, my eminent person. Thank you, Ibu.
I will follow Patang and conveying my support to Ambassador when she says so. But just some additional point maybe. When we are talking about possible creations of conventions in the ASEAN framework, we also need to make sure that we are not going to be trapped into the exercise of creating something only. There should be a value added behind the creations of the so-called new norm, including but not limited to conventions or maybe treaty. So maybe it's more personal, but for me, sometimes the question will always be whether we need a new set of norms, whether we need a certain set of conventions, or practically we still can live with existing other what do you call it, umbrella norm or standard. So it means maybe we shouldn't always jump into conclusion that we need certain specific convention for each challenges that we are facing. But of course, if the critical mass is reached, if there is a general consensus among us, especially in the leaders level, that the issue are that prominent, that the magnitude of the challenges are that big, of course, why close the possibility of creating some new norms or standards norm setting, including possible new conventions? So it means I'm trying not to judge the current situation where practically we only have two conventions on the active convention on the, what do you call it, trafficking in persons, the active. And active is practically there is a comma behind active. The ASEAN conventions, again, trafficking in person, comma, especially women and children. The next question, is it still relevant, the comma part itself? Because now recently we witnessed some of the trafficking in person case are practically no longer addressed or aimed to women and children. We are talking about some other new challenges, including the misuse of technology, scamming, the online scamming situation, and so on and so on. And then also similar issue connected to the terrorism, which is practically that is something that is agreeable for everybody, that the magnitude is too big. We need specific convention for that. But when we are going to make another convention for other issues, we cannot always create momentum. But if there is a momentum, let's try to embrace it all together. So that's the way we see it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next question is for all speakers. So he says, the way ASEAN works is very bureaucratic, so that some important decisions are required to go through a long bureaucratic road. How will ASEAN overcome this? My question is, does it need to be overcome? So who wants to answer first? Okay, Ambassador, go ahead.
Okay, I will go back to my statement just now that consensus is a much maligned principle in ASEAN. People make fun of it. It says it's too bureaucratic. It makes ASEAN slow. Okay. However, if you look at the many areas of cooperation where ASEAN has been successful in not only crafting, but in implementing, you will find out that indeed consensus is not entirely a bad term at all. Consensus enables ASEAN member states to buy into the project, and therefore they will implement it because they bought it. In the Philippines, we have a very complex manner of consulting whether we should enter into an agreement or not. We have the ASEAN Matters Technical Board, and I want to credit our ASEAN Philippines National Secretariat for consulting as many people as they can whenever we want to commit to a certain agreement or area of cooperation or treaty or convention or whatnot. Whether it is formal or informal commitment, we consult our people. And therefore, if that is what you mean by bureaucratic, for me, it is a good thing because we consult people who matter. And if what you say bureaucratic means that it takes a long time for ASEAN to come to an agreement, for me, you invest time and effort. Nobody knows that better than I do when I was chair of ASEAN. For a single agreement, we have to go through months and months of negotiation. So I should be the first one to complain about the so-called bureaucratic or slow ASEAN way. But I also know that in the end, we will be rewarded with an agreement that is going to be implemented because there is ownership by all the member states.
Dr. Roy, Dr. Tang, would you like to add?
Roy, with your permission, let me jump into this first.
Yes.
Thank you, Ibu. Thank you, Ambassador Elizabeth. I think, again, Ambassador Elizabeth hit the nail on his head. There is a purpose to the bureaucracy. And let me share a joke with you. And it's not a joke, but it's quite serious. Those who complain about ASEAN process being too bureaucratic, I think these are the people that have not applied for an EU research grant before. Yeah. I was told that there are professionals, full-time professionals who would assist you in filling up forms in order to apply for the grant. I think that is more bureaucratic than ASEAN process. But jokes aside, I think Mr. Liz's point is spot on in the sense that we take our time, effort to go through all the processes in order to get buy-in from all the relevant sectorals. The ownership is very important, especially sometimes when these agreements that are made at ASEAN level have to go back to the national level and have to go through their national congress, the national parliament, which is subject to the questioning by the legislature themselves and also by the various line ministries. So it is not that ASEAN deliberately want to put roadblocks to slow down the way we work, but there is a reason to do this. And I think as we work more on cross-sectoral and cross-pillar issues, this so-called bureaucracy will be more complex because for the simple reasons, there are more people that we have to consult because there are more stakeholders in that sense. So I don't see the bureaucracy as necessary a negative point, but I see the bureaucracy as a strength for ASEAN where to get to consensus, you need to have the consultation. So the bureaucracy is part of the consultation process. We have to remember consultation and consensus go hand in hand. You could not arrive at consensus without the consultation. Now, having said that, if there's any ways that we can Instead of filling up one form or one paperwork, we have not two instead of one. I think that we are always open to ideas to how to perhaps use digitalization, using technology to reduce use of paper, to streamline processes. But bureaucracy is here to stay, and there's a good reason to it. But cutting red tape is something that we are looking forward to. Just give you one example: ASEAN single window. I think that's a tangible example where we have replaced a lot of the traditional paperwork to digitalization to facilitate intra-ASEAN travel by cutting down the amount of bureaucracy involved in free trade. Thank you.
Dr. Roy?
Okay. When it comes to the issue of the mechanical itself in ASEAN, just to be very honest, bluntly honest, even I still have a problem in memorizing the acronyms in the ASEAN. So it's another evidence that we have a very robust mechanism in ASEAN that we can utilize, or maybe we need to utilize all the time when it comes to addressing challenges. But of course, there should be a principle of striking the right balance between process-oriented and result-oriented. And again, maybe here I'm going to be very personal in nature. There is a need, maybe we avoid the possibility of means justify ends, while practically we should work under the premises of ends justify means. So it means if there is something that we need to let's say to mainstream, there is some kind of mechanism that need to be mainstream, or let's avoid possibility to make another mechanical process that will lengthen the process. Maybe it's going to be better also if we have some kind of common understanding toward that directions. But again, with regard to the overall spirit itself, I always agree that consensus-based, based on the dialogue will always take times, and we should not neglect that particular process. I always also believe that good processes will end with good result. But again, we need to check whether we spend too much energy in the processes itself rather than try to come to the good result that might be actually achievable without going into the linear process of all those lengthy process, if the situation may be needed for us to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. Ambassador, you'd like something to add?
May I just, I was just reminded by the acronyms or the ASEAN alphabet soup. When we were chair, we issued a handbook because people had difficulty with the ASEAN alphabet soup. If you are an ASEAN citizen, ASEANite, you need to look at this ASEAN alphabet book. It's available at the ASEAN Secretariat website, I think. So you can consult that. But going back to what Director Roy was saying about streamlining processes, of course, ASEAN has attempted several ways to streamline the procedures. But for me, the role of the chair is a very important element in arriving at a consensus. It's also a part of the book that I wrote, what the ASEAN chair can do. If you are students of PhD or masteral students of ASEAN studies, ASEANology, maybe you can take up this topic. How powerful is the ASEAN chairmanship? What can it achieve for ASEAN? And for me, having been chair in 2017, for me, the ASEAN chair is instrumental in achieving consensus, even in the most difficult and intractable issues. So the role of the chair, the attempts of ASEAN to streamline, and of course, the acceptance of the fact that the slow process is the product of consultation. These are elements that should go into that question. Thank you.
So I know there are still a couple of more questions, but I want to delve a little bit more into this. May we conclude, students and observers of ASEAN, that precisely because decisions within ASEAN are made so meticulously, I don't want to say slow, meticulously careful, involving so many bureaucratic steps, it is precisely that that has kept peace in the region? Because everyone is so careful in involving consultation in all this decision-making process.
And also because of the fact that our decision-making at the national level is very different, as I was saying. Some need massive consultation, like Indonesia and the Philippines. Some just need internal consultation, like some member states. So what I am saying is, despite the fact that we're so different from one another in our, bureaucratic setup, we can still arrive at a consensus. And this should be what we should look at, not the slow process. And of course, there are ways to facilitate the process, but the mere fact that we are so different from one another should be taken into consideration. The mere fact that we're so different and yet are able to agree is a big a factor to be considered.
Could we say that we're actually very quick then, relatively? I mean, like you all mentioned, ASEAN member states are so diverse. The decision-making process in each country is also very different. The fact that ASEAN makes these decisions at all for very complex, sometimes very sensitive political and security issues, I would assume that we're relatively very quick then. Would you all agree, or Yulia is just talking out of her?
Reach a level of comfort in our dealings with each other after 55 years. We are able to read each other's minds and arrive at decisions that will be comfortable with everybody. So I wouldn't say quick or slow or this, that. It's just we should accept realities when discussing ASEAN and its decision-making process.
Dr. Zhang, you raise your hand.
Thank you very much. Well, my intervention here is that perhaps I think to a large extent, the ASEAN processes now that we have compared to other multilateral international organizations makes us rather effective just on one simple point, the use of the English language. Yeah, because we use English as the working language for ASEAN, this saves us a lot of time and resources and money from having to translate these documents into the national languages at all ASEAN meetings, having interpreters. For comparison, in the UN, how many interpreters do you have? How much time do you need to prepare a document and translate into the national languages? In the EU, the number is even higher. I think we save a lot of time to be more efficient just by having one common language, that all of us would understand and agree on, which is a lingua franca in our region as far as ASEAN work is concerned, which is the English language, rather than having at least 5 or 6 different languages. Thank you.
Sorry, Pak Roy, do you have something to add to this dialogue?
To the British English of the 9, because I use US English, just to modify that a little bit.
Pak Roy, do you have something to add?
Yeah, maybe when we are talking about especially the so-called decision-making process issues, something that lately becoming very interesting topic, especially in the framework of the HLTF processes. For us, again, actually the charter, the so-called ASEAN Charter, I mean, I have it in my hand, it's already quite, what do you call it, comprehensive when we are talking about Article 20 about consultation on consensus and so on and so on. Even the possibility to, let's say, to have something that is not precedented based on the role of ASEAN summit under Article 7. So practically summit level can do everything, even the unprecedented one. So it means there are some elements that can be utilized in the charter, although maybe not really formulated to that aim at the beginning, but we still can use provision under the charter for what you call for our addressing collective challenges. But of course, sometimes the devil was in the detail. There are some element in the charter that is still too broad. So we are lacking of guiding process, rule of procedure, or I don't know, maybe some kind of just like guidelines to make some kind of actions. So it means maybe we need to be very honest to ourselves and checking whether we need to create those guidelines or practically we still can live with the current situation, living in the broad regulation under the charter only. So that's the discussion that we have now. Again, we have no hidden agenda, intention. Our what do you call it? Focus is only to make sure ASEAN collectively has a strong capability as the institution to address future challenges that might need our fast response. But then again, it shouldn't be at the expense of our principle, including consensus, dialogue, and so on, that is already also put in the charter. But again, it's only about how to find a right balance among those practical and norms that we always adhere to.
Okay. Thank you, Pak Roy. This next question is for Ambassador Buen Suseso. How do you see ASEAN IPR's pool of expertise function being manifested beyond the ASEAN Women Peace Registry?
May I remove the last part of the question, because OPAR is the only creation of ASEAN IPR today. And it has not yet reached its full potential. And so therefore, I'd like for ASEAN IPR to strongly push for the operationalization of the OPAR, awesome OPAR. You know, it took us 3 years to reach consensus. Again, a very long process by some people's standards. And yet, the reason why it took us too long was we needed to consider the particular condition or resources of each member state. The ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation is focused on peace processes and reconciliation processes in member states. But some member states do not have such issues. For example, Singapore, Brunei, you know, we don't, and even countries which have peace and reconciliation processes, like Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and Myanmar, we are in different stages and different issues. But always the end is to stabilize the nation, member state. Just now, in the beginning of my intervention, I was talking about being not the weakest link in ASEAN. Therefore, we need the strength of one member state is the strength of the 10 as a region. And so therefore, ASEAN IPRs was conceived to address this particular need of ASEAN member states at different levels of need, as well as of regional peace and stability. So in that context, we try to reconcile the needs as well as the resources of member states. It was a project that could not move on because not all member states had peace and reconciliation processes. Only the Philippines, Myanmar, Thailand to some extent, and then of course Indonesia in the past, in the present, had different levels of peace and reconciliation processes. And so that is why one of the objectives of the ASEAN IPR was to create a pool of expertise, of experts that could be utilized in the implementation of peace and reconciliation efforts in the region. And that first attempt was the OPAR. It took us a long time. Finally, it became a reality in late 2018. As I said, the growth was stunted by the pandemic. They were supposed to meet each other and, strategize how to be of use in ASEAN. This is a group of experts in various areas in peace and reconciliation processes. Some are negotiators, some are facilitators, some are mediators, some are research advocates, some are research professors or research scientists, etc. So they are from different levels of expertise. And what I would like ASEAN IPR to do is to make use. It is not a mere registry. Of what use is a register if you do not use it? So please, I appeal to you to make use of this very important pool of experts that have, that we have already in this region. My inspiration for this actually was the Nordic Women Mediators Network. But as I said, not everybody had mediators or experts or resources in their respective member states. So we had to reach a compromise. And that compromise is a beautiful compromise because now you have different kinds of expertise in the OPAR. So before you think of other pools of expertise, you should operationalize OPAR because it is a dream come true, and do not please contribute to the stunting of the group. I think that they have already initiated their strategic planning in October in Cambodia. Thank you, Cambodia, for your leadership in this issue. Cambodia is a very strong proponent of WPS. The other WPS that is close to my heart, of course. I don't know if you can guess the other one. West Philippine Sea. Anyway, two WPSs close to my heart. I appeal to the ASEAN IPR, build on what has been established. And then in the process, we started this already in 2019 or 2018, conduct symposiums or workshops or on-the-job training to develop their skill in mediating, in facilitating, in conducting research, etc. We already have this unique collective of expertise in peace and reconciliation. Let's make use of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Bansuceso. This next question is probably for two of you. May I start with Pak Roy? What is the status of inclusivity of youth in peace dialogue? I know you mentioned this earlier, some of the initiatives that has already been undertaken, but perhaps you could share with us what your thoughts about youth inclusivity in peace dialogue.
Thank you, Buya. I mean, maybe it's more a generic in nature rather than in a concrete way of explaining it. Since I also need to check with my other colleague dealing with the issue of youth in particular, but in a more conceptual way, the way we see it practically when we're talking about the beneficiaries of peace, like it or not, we are going to directly think about young generations, the future generations. So it means there should be a platform, there should be a room for our young generation, for youth to always be there during all dialogue of the peace process. I mean, especially now, even in the United Nations framework, we are talking about sustaining peace concept rather than segmented peace process. I mean, from the peace early warning, peace making, peacekeeping, peace building, sustainable development, or all those spectrum of peace need a certain degree of involvement from all stakeholders, including youth, young generations. So it will practically give more or less warranty factor that the current deliberations, peace process, dialogue will also be followed up by young generations, because they are already there from the beginning, and they are going to be the one that becoming the beneficiary in the future based on the proper peace process built by the comprehensive what you call situations in nature. So that's it.
Thank you, Pak Roy. Dr. Tang, would you like to add? Perhaps you can share, are there any currently in ASEAN Secretariat or any kind of cooperation that's already running that involves or includes youth in dialogues of peace?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we have to acknowledge that there's a mindset change in two regards. Firstly, in terms of the demography of youth, we are not just talking about groups of people in the 15 teenagers. ASEAN define youth as from 15 to 35 years old. In that sense, not old, quite young. So we're thinking not about youth, but also includes young adults as well, and those who have their first degree and up to 35. So it's a bigger pool of our ASEAN constituency that we are referring to. Second mindset change is that when we think of the youth, we always think that youth can only participate and contribute in terms of sports, education, educational exchange, those things in the social cultural. So to include youth in discussion on politics, on security, is indeed a mindset change. Yeah, in the sense that we, as Pak Roy has alluded to, we have to take the youth seriously and as a part of a major player as we move forward in building a more sustainable and peaceful and secure ASEAN community. One tangible, concrete example that I can share is the ASEAN Secretariat, with the support of Brunei Darussalam and also ASEAN member states, has successfully implemented the ASEAN Young ASEAN Young Fellowship ASEAN Junior Fellowship Program at ASEAN Secretariat. Sorry for forgetting the name itself. And this is where we intentionally target young diplomats, those who have served for maybe 3 to 5 years, and encourage them to spend a month at the ASEAN Secretariat to learn the ASEAN process, to learn also to exchange views on the ASEAN community building, and think not just in terms of Indonesia, Brunei, or Malaysia in the national perspective, but to think regionally. So we're encouraging young professionals, young adults to think more and regionally, as Ambassador Elizabeth have mentioned, on ASEAN identity, to think beyond our nationalities and also to adopt and regional worldview, especially an ASEAN worldview in that sense. Also, I recall in the last 1 or 2 weeks, there was a major ASEAN meeting activity, which ASEAN Secretary participated as well in Vientiane, involving the youth. So youth is indeed the new area of growth, in the sense that everybody is putting and investing, and rightfully, a lot of energy and resources too, and not just in the traditional domain of sports, culture, education. Those are important, but increasingly we are seeing them as a legitimate and a serious actor in other serious issues, including peace and security. I'm sure Ambassador Puja can also share some of the initiatives that ASEAN IPR has done involving the youth. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tang. Apologies, audience. I think we have one more question. And this is for Ambassador Buen Suseso. The Philippines is the first country in ASEAN to have a national action plan on youth, peace, and security. What are the movements or government efforts happening now to support Filipino young peace builders?
I thought you were referring to the UNSCR 1325. We were also the first one.
Yes, I heard.
UNSCR 1325 plan of action. We're in our second plan of action, and I always take the opportunity to talk about women issues in forums, and we are trying to not be a model, but to share best practices in the sense that we include in the budgets of all government offices, 15% of all government budgets should be dedicated to gender and development issues. What's happening? They're not recording me anymore. Thank you very much.
I think somebody pressed that by mistake.
The Philippines, of course, is again leading in the area of involving the youth, because indeed we are seeing how young people can be a strong force in all areas of life. From politics, we have very many, quite a record number of young people in government service in politics, and of course our young entrepreneurs are also playing a big role, and they have always been, of course, in the sociocultural scene. So I think that it is it pays well to look at the participation of the youth in all aspects of life, not just in government, but in the day-to-day lives of ASEAN. ASEAN is on the right path, issuing the leader statement on youth and on the involvement of youth, and I'm looking forward to the leadership of Indonesia next year, how we can crystallize this leader statement into specific action. The Philippines will be very happy to lead or participate in these action plans for the involvement of youth in all aspects of ASEAN cooperation.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we are closing in on the end of our session for this dialogue. Once again, apologies to our audience if I didn't get to your question. I hope that some of the key points, though, were addressed in the answers that the speakers gave us. I will not dare to sum up the key points here, only to say that the task force is working on the ASEAN 2025 vision, and we shall wait which parts we keep, which parts is going to be thrown away because it no longer works for ASEAN in the future. But one thing is here to stay, and that is the strength of ASEAN, which has been proven over 5 decades, is that ASEAN does have a very specific way of working and doing things, including the long meetings and the very long discussions and consultation. However, it has proven to be the best way to work and to maintain peace and security and stability in the region. And I would gather that that is one of the elements that will be kept for the future, because let's face it, we're now at 10 members, we might go to 11, and the consultations will get just more complicated. And we all have our own specific political and security issues, and along with the non-traditional security threats, there are just so many more things to discuss. And I would gather that the younger generation, the youth that will be, living with this fruit of ASEAN's political and security cooperation, will eventually, or hopefully, see that Okay, it does work. So we should thank everyone that has been involved in making ASEAN work all this time. So please join me in thanking our three very distinguished and prominent speakers, Ambassador Elizabeth, Her Excellency Ambassador Elizabeth Buen Suseso, Bapak Roy Sumirat, and Dr. Tang Siamun. Thank you so much for your insight. And I'm Julia Supatmo. Apologies if there are any things that I have been that have said that have maybe not been received well. Please, my sincere apologies for that. So now I give the session back to Ibu Kartika and ASEAN IPR. Thank you.
Thank you, Yulia Supatmo, for moderating this afternoon's discussion. We would also like to thank our distinguished speakers for their time, for their presentations, and for answering the questions posed by the audience. Now, I think the organizer has shared a link for the e-certificate to this webinar. If I'm not mistaken, the link is in the chat box for the participants in Zoom. If you are having difficulties in opening the link, please send us an email as stated in the chat box. I think we will have some closing remarks from the Executive Director of ASEAN IPR. Ambassador Puja, over to you, please.
Thank you, Kartika, and thank you so much for everybody for this very rich and stimulating discussion. Since this is the last series of our discussion series for this year, so probably I just wish to address a couple of things, and some issues actually has been addressed by all the panelists, and we thank you so much for very valuable and very insights, recommendations, especially for the ASEAN IPR. In particular, also we thanks Ambassador Elizabeth for giving us so many inputs on the how we should make use of the OPER. Of course, OPER now after COVID is a bit slowed down, and then we energize OPER more now. Since a couple of months ago, we had we brought actually most of the members OPER to Thailand to discuss among themselves, thanks to the UN women for supporting their gathering in Bangkok. And also we brought the OPER members to meet physically with the members of the governing councils in Phnom Penh last month. That's a very useful encounters, very useful exchange between GCs and the OPER. So both of them try to build a mutual confidence. You may be briefed by the OPER member from the Philippines, Madam Ging and Madam Aminah Rasul, because they both are very instrumental in bringing OPER to a higher plane in the future. With regard to the youth, peace and security, yes, only last week we had a huge gathering of youth YPS in Vientiane. So we brought youth to YPS to Vientiane. Thanks to the UN supports, we discussed the youth peace security agenda, which is very, very rich discussion and very, very inspiring actually, how we can bring in the future youth as agent of peace to contribute the culture of peace in our regions. Of course, on the WPS agenda, we work very, very diligently. My colleague Kartika worked on the WPS module, which is currently is ongoing. It is supported by Canada and the United Kingdom. So we are actually on the progress. And of course, on the youth also, one thing, achievement, I think thanks to Ibu Julia in this respect, we had this youth tech module, It was adopted a couple of months ago. So this is also very instrumental achievement on the youth issues, which can be used by our youth in the regions on the youth tech module. And finally, I follow very closely with regard to the discussion on the decision-making process. I believe you recall the ASEAN anthem. We dare to dream, we said to care. I believe this is also part of the this spirits, how we care of each other. Indeed, in the decision-making process, we have a spirit of no one should left behind. So I believe the process is as important as the objective of those decision-making process. Because this is very important also, the decision-making process, those decisions could be implemented. It's not only just to be made, but to be implemented in a comfortable level by everybody. You mentioned about that. Not always slow, because sometimes ASEAN leaders can make a very, very fast decision-making process. Look at the 5-point consensus last April. So how quick they make this 5-point consensus. It didn't take months or years to decide this. And also for some pressing situations, leaders can make also very, very quick discussions just by making informal consultation. I think this is part of the dynamics in our region, which we need also to acknowledge. Of course, there is no one size fits all models in this respect, but we determined to move forward to a betterment of our people in ASEAN. In this respect, ASEAN Hyper determined to join the rest of the ASEAN community to make progress. So with this, thank you so much once again, Ibu Julia, Ambassador Elizabeth, Paroy, and Director Tang for your very valuable contribution. And I wish you all the best and wish you Merry Christmas and happy and prosperous New Year 2023. Thank you so much. Salamat. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Ibu Puja. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the penultimate session of the ASEAN IPR Discussion Series 2022. This also concludes the series of commemorative activities of the ASEAN IPR's 10th anniversary. We started off the year with the first discussion series session in April 2022. We then began the various youth-oriented activities such as the ASEAN Youth Peace Figures, the Youth Peace Essay Competition, and the forum entitled Dialogue on Peace and Multilateralism, the Youth as the Agents of Future Change. We topped it off with our ASEAN IPR Peace Exhibition, a showcase of the Institute's achievements at the sidelines of the 40th and 41st ASEAN Summit in Phnom Penh, November 2022. Lastly, we also received many warm greetings and messages of congratulations from our partners, as well as launched our profile video titled ASEAN IPR, The Journey So Far. We express our sincere gratitude to the ASEAN IPR Governing Council, the Advisory Board, the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry, like-minded institutions from all over the region, as well as outside the region, wonderful partners and stakeholders for celebrating this anniversary with us. We continue to count on your cooperation, partnership, and support for our future initiatives. On a personal note, I would also like to thank the team at the ASEAN IPR Secretariat, including the amazing team of interns who have helped us throughout the year. None of this would have been possible without your support. So thank you very much, team. The past year may have been a colorful journey for all of us, and I sincerely hope that 2023 will bring fairer winds, better fortune, and ensured peace for the region. As the motto of the new chairmanship states, ASEAN matters, epicentrum of growth. I hope that the region will also be the epicentrum of global peace and stability. In closing, we wish you happy holidays, stay safe and healthy, and until we meet again. Thank you and good afternoon. Peace. Thank you, Excellencies. Thank you to all attendees in Zoom. Thank you, Ambassador Beth. Thank you, Pak Roy.
Thank you, Excellency. Bu Kartika.
Thank you, Excellencies. Thank you, Team IPR.
Thank you, Dr. Tang. Take care until we meet again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Bu Yulia, terima
All the
kasih.
best.
Ambassador Elizabeth, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
Thank you very much. Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy New Year.
ASEAN IPR team, please stop the live stream. Thank you very much. Thank you, Paidi. Thank you all participants.